The blizzard had been building all afternoon, and by the time Edric Holland banked his workshop fire for the night, the wind was screaming through the gap beneath his door as if it had a grievance with him personally. He had not planned to go back outside. He had a kettle on the hook, a pot of barley softening on the edge of the coals, and a half-finished joint on his workbench that he meant to study before sleep. He was a carpenter by trade, and a particular one. In the town of Veldmere and for 40 miles around it, men hired Edric Holland because he did not use a single nail where a proper mortise and tenon could be cut instead, and because a piece of furniture built by his hands would outlast the man who commissioned it. He worked alone. He lived alone. The house attached to his workshop was small and orderly, and on most nights it suited him exactly. He had almost reached the inner door when he heard it. Not the wind, not the groan of his workshop shutters. Something lower, closer, and unmistakably human in its shape, a sound between a gasp and a cough, landing just outside his front door like a stone dropped from a height. He turned back. He lifted the latch and pushed the door open against the drift, and the wind hit him in the face hard enough to make his eyes water. The lantern he held through a tight yellow circle into the dark, and at the edge of that circle, half collapsed against the stone of his doorstep with one hand pressed flat to her side, was an orc woman. She was large, a head taller than him and broad through the shoulders in the way of a soldier or a laborer, but none of that registered before the other things did. The gray-green of her skin had gone pale where the cold had worked into her. Her traveling cloak was soaked dark from shoulder to hip on the left side, and when the wind shifted and the lantern light caught her properly, Edric could see that the dark was not only water. One of her tusks was chipped. Her braids had come half loose from their binding, and ice had formed along the length of them. Her eyes, when she turned them up to find him, were the deep amber of autumn leaves and very nearly calm. The kind of calm a person achieves when they have burned through panic and come out the other side into something quieter and more honest. She did not speak, she only looked at him. There are moments in a man's life that do not require deliberation. Edric Holland had been born to a family that kept a plain wooden plaque above the kitchen hearth with a single line carved into it, a line his grandfather had put there. A man who will not open his door in a blizzard has nothing worth locking inside. He had read it so many times as a boy that it had stopped being words and become simply the shape of a thing he knew. He held the door wider. "Come in," he said. She did not move at first. He thought for a moment that she was past moving under her own power, and he took a step out into the cold, already calculating the angle, the reach, whether he could get her weight across the threshold without dropping her, but then something shifted in her face. Something that might have been surprise, if surprise in a person who has seen enough of the world can still be recognized as such. She pressed herself upright against the doorpost, pulled one breath deliberately through her nose, and stepped over the threshold on her own feet. He got her to the bench beside the fire before her legs decided they were done, and she sat and breathed and let the warmth begin to work on her, while he closed the door and drove the bolt home against the wind. He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she had come from or why she was traveling the Veldmere road in a blizzard with a wound in her side. He was not a man who believed that a person in crisis owed him an accounting before he extended the ordinary decencies of shelter and warmth. The questions, if they mattered, could wait until she was in a condition to answer them with any honesty. What he did instead was practical. He hung her cloak on the hook nearest the fire. He found the cloth he kept for cleaning brushes and tore it into strips with the efficiency of a man who had done such things before. He brought his good tin lamp to the bench and held it close enough to see, and then he looked at the wound with the same attentive, quiet focus he gave to every piece of work that was set before him. It was a gash along her left side, high up under the ribs, deep enough to have bled heavily but not, he judged, deep enough to have reached anything vital. The cold had slowed the bleeding, which was perhaps the only useful thing the blizzard had done. He cleaned it as carefully as he knew how with the hot water from his kettle and a small bottle of spirit that he kept on the shelf above the workbench. She made no sound during this. He was aware of her watching him, not with suspicion exactly, but with a focused, measuring attention, the way a person watches a craftsman whose work they are not yet sure they can trust. "You've done this before," she said. Her voice was low and even. She spoke the common tongue without an accent. "A little," he said. "Who for?" "Myself, mostly. You pick up bad habits when you live alone." He set a folded strip of cloth to the wound and pressed, and she absorbed the pressure without flinching. "And once for my neighbor's mule, which makes you the second most reluctant patient I've treated." A pause. Then, from the orc woman, a single quiet sound that was not quite a laugh, but was not one either. He bandaged the wound with the strips he'd prepared. He tied the binding off and smoothed the knot flat with his thumb in the way he smoothed every joint he cut, not out of vanity, but because a clean finish was its own form of respect. Then he went to the pot on the coals and served 2 bowls of the barley, and he set one before her on the bench without making any particular ceremony of it. She looked at the bowl. "I can pay," she said. "It's barley," he said. "I didn't cure the pork in it myself, no charge for barley." She ate. He ate. The fire cracked and the blizzard pressed at the shutters, and outside the world was entirely white and entirely indifferent. And inside this small, warm room 2 people who had never seen each other before shared a meal in the straightforward silence of mutual survival. When the bowls were empty, she told him her name, or she told him a name, which is not always the same thing. She said it was Myra. He accepted it as one accepts a gift that has been offered in good faith, and he did not examine it too closely. He gave her the bed in the small room off the workshop. He himself slept on the bench before the fire, wrapped in the wool he kept for cold weather nights, and if he lay awake for some time listening to the blizzard and turning the evening over in his mind, he did not find anything in it that troubled him. He had made a simple decision to do a simple right thing, and it had cost him a bowl of barley and an evening's sleep. He had paid worse prices for worse reasons. By morning the blizzard had burned itself out, and the world was very still and very white and extraordinarily bright. Edric was up before first light. He had coffee on the fire and bread set to warm by the time she appeared in the doorway of the small room, moving carefully, with one hand resting near but not quite touching her side. She had found his spare mirror on the shelf and rebraided her hair. The ice was gone from it, and the braids were neat and close to her head, pulled back from a face that in the morning light was simply a face, strong-boned and composed, with a faint line of old scar across the left brow that he had not noticed the night before, the kind of scar that takes a long time to fade all the way. She had cleaned her traveling clothes as best she could. She looked like a person who kept themselves tidy as a matter of discipline, not as a matter of comfort, the way soldiers do. He poured coffee. He set bread and a small crock of cold butter on the workbench, which served as his table at meals when he had not gotten around to building himself a proper one. She settled onto the opposite stool and regarded the scene with the same measuring attention she'd given to his bandaging the night before. "Your workshop," she said. "Yes." "What are you building?" She tilted her head toward the long piece of dark timber on the main bench, the one he'd been planning to study before the evening's events had intervened. "A table," he said. "Council commission. They want it ready by the spring convening." She looked at the timber again. It was a single piece of old ash, 8 feet long, with a natural edge along one side that curved slightly inward, like a held breath. He had been thinking about it for several weeks, how to honor the curve without losing the function, how to let the wood speak without letting it shout. "They trust you with council work," she said. "They trust the wood," he said. "I'm just the one who doesn't ruin it." She was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in her large hands. He noticed that her knuckles carried old marks, the kind of marks that come from work that involves both precision and force, not unlike his own. but the pattern of them was different. His marks came from tools. Hers, he thought, came from something else, though he could not have said what. "I'll be out of your way today," she said, "when the road is clear enough." "The road won't be clear enough for 2 days," he said. "Drifts, sit, eat your bread." She looked at him. There was something in that look that he couldn't read entirely, not defiance, not gratitude, but some version of recalibration, as if she were adjusting an expectation that had been set some time ago and had never, until this moment, been revised. She ate her bread. The 2 days extended, as such things do in winter, to 3 and then to 4. The road remained closed. He did not make it her problem or his. She recovered steadily. He could see it in the way she moved, the small increments of ease returning to her bearing each morning. She helped where she could without being asked. She kept the fire banked, brought in wood from the stack outside the back door, washed the bowls after meals with the brisk competence of someone accustomed to not relying on others for the small necessary things. She asked before she touched anything in the workshop, which he respected. What he had not expected was the quality of her attention. She watched him work with an interest that went beyond mere occupation of time. She watched the way he read the wood before he cut, the way he ran his hand along the grain, not feeling for smoothness but for direction, for the timber's own intentions. She watched how he chose each tool and how he stood differently for each operation, feet finding the angles that let the body's weight work with the cut rather than against it. She did not ask unnecessary questions. When she asked at all, it was the right question at the right moment, the kind of question that shows a listener has been paying attention to what has not been said. On the 3rd evening she sat across the workshop from him while he worked by lantern light on the joinery for the council table, and she said, "You said it was a commission." "That's right. Regional Council, Veldmere and the surrounding townships." "That's right. Do you know what they mean to table at the spring convening?" He glanced up briefly. "The border dispute," he said. "The grazing rights question. Been waiting 3 years for the right moment to address it." 3 years, she said. "Politics," he said. He returned to his work. "Takes time." A silence. "Then, do you know the problem with the dispute?" He set down his mallet and looked at her properly, because her voice had changed, not dramatically, but in the way that a current changes when it moves from open water over stone, something more deliberate in it, something that knew its own weight. "I know it's complicated," he said. "It's not complicated," she said. "The language of the original charter is ambiguous on one point. The word common in the 3rd clause is being read by each side according to what they need it to mean. What they require is a ruling on the original intent of the charter drafters, not a new negotiation. The precedents for such a ruling exist. 2 of them date from the 2nd decade of the regional compact. The council members simply don't know they exist, because the archive where they're recorded has been considered inaccessible since the flooding of the lower records hall, and no one has thought to look at the overflow holdings in the secondary vault." He was very still. She stopped herself. Something behind her eyes shuddered briefly, the way a lamp shutter clicks when a hand closes it from old habit. She looked at her hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I read too much." "You read the law," he said carefully. "Old habit," she said. "I used to work in it." He thought about that. He thought about the precision of what she had said, not the imprecision of someone who had studied law out of curiosity or circumstance, but the specific and navigational confidence of someone who had spent years inside it, who knew its architecture the way he knew the grain of old ash. He thought about the quality of her attention and the old scars on her knuckles, and the name she had given him that landed in a room like a thing set down rather than a thing placed. He picked up his mallet. He returned to the joint. "You should tell the council," he said. "That's not something I can do just now," she said, with a quietness that ended the subject as cleanly as a well-cut joint. He did not press. On the 3rd afternoon, When the snow had settled and the light was good, she came and stood at the edge of the workshop and watched him work for a long while without speaking. He was cutting the mortises for the council table's main trestle, slow, careful work with a sharp chisel and a mallet, the kind of work that cannot be hurried because the wood remembers every mistake and holds it against you for the life of the piece. He let her watch. He had no objection to being watched by someone who was paying attention. Eventually she said, "How do you know where to cut?" He set the chisel and tapped it lightly, clearing a shaving. "The joint tells you," he said. "You read the grain first. The grain tells you the wood's direction, where it's strong, where it wants to give. Then you plan the joint to go with the direction, not against it. A joint that fights the grain will hold for 20 years and then fail. A joint that works with it will hold for 100. You can't see the grain change," she said. "Not when you're working the inside of the cut." "No," he said. "You feel it. The mallet tells you. There's a different sound when you're running with the grain and a different sound when you're crossing it. A bad carpenter ignores the difference. A good one stops and listens." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's how law works," she said. "The letter of the law is the cut. The intention behind it is the grain. If you work only the letter, the joint holds until it doesn't. If you work the intention, if you understand what the law was meant to do and for whom, then the ruling holds." He stopped his mallet. He looked at her. She had the slightly arrested look of someone who has said something they hadn't planned to say. She didn't retreat from it. "Sorry," she said. "I make analogies when I think." "Don't apologize for it," he said. "That was exactly right." She stayed in the workshop doorway for another hour, reading from a small book she had produced from her pack, while he finished the first mortise and started the second. The fire cracked. The snow outside went blue in the afternoon light. It was, he reflected, a pleasanter afternoon than he usually had in February. On the fourth morning the road was passable. He told her so at breakfast. She nodded and began to gather the small things that were hers, the pack that had been set in the corner of the small room, the traveling cloak he had dried and mended where it had been torn along the hem. He had done the mending the previous afternoon without mentioning it. She found the stitching now and looked at it for a moment, then looked at him with an expression that did not have a word for it exactly in the common tongue. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "It needed doing," he said. Another of those silences that were not awkward. Then, "I owe you more than bread money." "You owe me nothing," he said. "The storm caught you. You were injured. Those are things that happen to people, and people help each other with them or they don't. I'm in the habit of the first." She shouldered the pack. She stood in the doorway of the workshop for a moment, and there was something about the way she stood there, the length of her, the stillness of her, the particular combination of soldierly self-containment and something else, something quieter, that sat just behind it like the natural edge of that old ash timber, that made the room feel different when she was in it than it had felt in all the years before. "My name is not Myra," she said. He met her eyes. "I didn't think it was." "My name is Vora," she said. "Vora of the Highstone clan." He recognized the name. Not because he knew her. He did not know her, had never seen her face before that blizzard night, but because the name of Highstone clan was not unknown in Veldmere. They were the oldest clan in the eastern ranges, the keepers of the law compact that had governed orc and human relations in this part of the world for 200 years. Their lawkeeper, the officer they called the High Judge, the one whose rulings on the compact's language were treated as binding by both sides, was a figure of considerable weight in the region. He had not known the current one's name. He knew it now. "I see," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "It doesn't change anything." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't change anything." She walked out into the white morning. He watched from the doorway until the road bent and she was gone, and then he went back inside and stood for a moment in the middle of his workshop, at the long ash timber on the bench, at the two stools, at the bowls stacked clean by the basin. And then he picked up his tools and went back to work. He thought about what she had said about the border dispute. He thought about the archive and the overflow holdings, and the second vault that no one had thought to check. He thought about these things for a long time, and then, in the afternoon, he put on his coat and walked to the council registrar's office and asked, as politely as a man can ask, whether the secondary vault in the records archive might be opened for a routine inventory. The registrar blinked at him. Edric Holland was well known in Veldmere, but not as a man who had opinions about the records archive. "I was told there may be some documents of interest in there," Edric said. "For the spring convening, precedent cases, someone ought to look." The registrar said he would look into it. Edric went home and worked on his table. 2 days later, a council clerk arrived at his workshop, with a look of professional excitement that a clerk tries to suppress but rarely can, and told him that yes, in fact, there were documents in the secondary vault that had not been examined in 40 years, and 2 of them appeared to bear directly on the language of the 3rd clause of the original charter, and the council chairman was very interested to know who had suggested the search. Edric said it was a friend who read too much, and left it at that. He thought about Vora of the Highstone clan after that, more than he might have expected. He thought about the way she had known instantly and precisely what the council needed, and the way she had then pulled herself back, clamped down on it, made herself smaller than she was, not out of timidity, because he did not think she had a timid bone in her body, but out of something that looked very much like the kind of caution a person develops when the world has made clear to them that being known is dangerous. He did not know why she had been traveling alone through a blizzard with a wound in her side and a name that wasn't hers. He did not know who had put that wound there. He thought about it, though, because he was a man who noticed things quietly and turned them over carefully, the way he turned a piece of wood to find the grain, and what he thought was that a person of her caliber and her bearing, traveling alone in disguise through winter weather on a road that led away from the eastern ranges, that person was either running from something or going towards something, and that neither explanation spoke well of the circumstances that had preceded his doorstep. He hoped she was all right. He went back to work on the table. The table was extraordinary, and he knew it. Not because he was vain about his work, he was not, but because he had been working toward this particular piece his whole life without knowing it. The old ash had given him its best. The natural edge ran along the long side of the table like a shoreline, worn smooth and slightly irregular, and he had honored it completely, building the trestle below in the clean geometric language of functional joinery, and letting the top remain exactly what it was, a piece of the world brought inside, set at a height where men could sit across from one another and look each other in the eye. He had not put a single nail in it. Every joint was cut, fitted, and wedged. It would last 100 years. He was finishing the final trestle when the riders came. There were 4 of them, and they were not from Veldmere. He could tell by the horses, tall, rangy animals with the endurance-bred look of the eastern mountain roads, and by the quality of their equipment, which was neither showy nor cheap, but entirely practical, the gear of people who spent their lives moving across difficult terrain without waste. 3 of the 4 wore the dark travel clothes of clan outriders. The 4th wore a coat the color of ash-gray stone, with a small emblem at the collar that Edric did not recognize. They did not dismount immediately. They looked at his workshop, at the sign above the door, at him, standing in the doorframe with a mallet in his hand, and then the one in the gray coat said, "Are you Edric Holland?" "I am," he said. "We're looking for a woman who may have passed through Veldmere," the rider said. Tall, green-gray coloring, orc. She would have come through during the blizzard of last week. We have reason to believe she was injured. Edric looked at them. He thought about the name that was not Myra, and the face that kept its own counsel, and the hand pressed careful and steady to its own wound, and he thought about the quality of trust that is given to a stranger in a doorway in a blizzard, which is not a quality given lightly. "What's your interest?" he asked. The rider in the gray coat looked at him carefully. "We're her people," he said. She's been missing for 19 days. Missing, Edric said. She was taken from the clan seat by men employed by the Stonemark faction, the writer said, with a directness that suggested he had already decided Edric was worth talking to plainly. There was an attack on the road. Her escort was scattered. She was wounded. We've been following her trail since. Edric leaned against the doorframe and considered this. Why was she taken, he said. Because she was about to rule on the charter dispute, the writer said, and the Stonemark faction did not like how she was going to rule. He paused. She would have found in favor of the grazing commons. It would have stripped the faction's brokers of 20 years of profit from land they'd been quietly enclosing. They decided it was easier to remove her than to argue their case before her bench. A long pause in the cold morning air. Is she safe? Edric said. We don't know, the writer said. We know she left Veldmere 4 days ago. Her trail goes east. We believe she's headed back to clan territory under her own power, which means she knows the charges against her have been cleared. He paused again. The men who took her are in custody. 2 of the faction's senior brokers have confessed. The charges against her, the accusations of treason that were fabricated to justify her removal, have been formally withdrawn. She has been restored. We're trying to bring her home. Edric looked at the writer for a long moment. He thought about the word treason, and about the orc woman who had sat on his workbench stool and looked at his timber and said the word, common. In a charter clause was being read by each side according to what they needed it to mean. He thought about the kind of courage it takes to keep your mind clear, and your voice level, and your attention precise, when people are trying very hard to make you smaller than you are. She came through on the blizzard night, he said. She was injured, a gash on the left side, not deep. I took her in and tended it. She stayed until the road cleared. She left 4 days ago, yes. He paused. She walked. She had a pack. She was moving well. The relief on the writer's face was genuine and unguarded, the relief of someone who has been carrying a fear for 3 weeks. Did she say where she was going? East, Edric said. She didn't say more than that. He hesitated, and then, she mentioned the charter dispute. She knew exactly how to resolve it. She told me where to look. The writer was still. The secondary archive vault, Edric said. I asked the registrar to open it. They found the precedent documents. The council chairman has them now. The writer in the gray coat looked at him for a long time. You did that, he said. She told me what to look for, Edric said. I just opened a door. The writer dismounted. He stood in the road before Edric's doorstep with the particular straightness of a man who knows the weight of what he is doing, and he said, What you did for her, in the blizzard, taking her in, tending her wound, asking no questions, that is a debt the Highstone clan does not forget. I want you to know that. It was a blizzard, Edric said, and she needed help. There's no debt. There is, the writer said, whether you choose to call it one or not. They rode east. Edric went back inside and went back to work. He thought about it for several days. Not obsessively. He was not a man given to obsession. But in the way a good problem sits at the edge of the mind while the hands work on other things. He thought about the precision of what she had known, and the courage it must take to keep that precision intact when people are trying to take everything from you. He thought about 19 days alone on winter roads with a wound and a false name, and the specific kind of fear that does not show itself in the face, because showing it would cost more than it was worth. He thought about the council table, finished and delivered, sitting in the great room of the meeting house where the 2 people's representatives would sit across from each other in the spring and try to decide what they owed each other. He hoped they were equal to it. He hoped the wood would help them, the way good materials sometimes do, reminding the people who use them that something worth making lasts, and that the things worth making are almost never the quick ones. He took on 2 commissions in the weeks that followed. A set of shelving for the apothecary, which was straightforward and satisfying in a clean, uncomplicated way, and a rocking chair for the widower at the edge of town, a man in his 70s who had bad knees and a long-standing friendship with Edric, and who had been asking for the chair for 3 years without quite getting around to commissioning it formally. Edric built it from a piece of white oak he had been keeping, with arms curved to the right radius and runners cut so that the arc of the rock was gentle, and even end would not strain the old man's back. When he delivered it, and the widower sat down in it for the first time, the sound the man made, a quiet exhale, the sound of something set down that had been carried a long time, was the only payment Edric needed. He thought about Vora of the Highstone clan, riding east with her escort through the spring countryside, going home to a bench that was hers again, and a clan that had been waiting 3 weeks to have her back. He hoped the road was good. He hoped the wound had healed clean. He thought she would like the table when she saw it. The table was done by the end of that week. The council collected it on a clear, cold afternoon with 3 men and a wagon, and when they carried it out through the workshop doors and Edric saw it in the flat winter light, the old ash, the natural edge like a shoreline, the trestle joinery clean and true, he felt what he always felt at the end of a good piece of work, which was the specific quiet satisfaction of a thing done right for the right reasons. He had nothing to add to it. It was finished. He swept the workshop. He sharpened his tools. He took on the smaller commissions that had waited, and he worked through the rest of that winter in the ordinary rhythm of his days. And if the small room off the workshop was sometimes quieter than it had been before the blizzard, he was not a man who made a grievance of his own solitude. Spring came early that year. The roads dried out and the trade caravans began running again, and Veldmere opened up from its winter configuration and became a town in full operation rather than merely a collection of buildings crouched against the cold. The council's spring convening was set for the last week of the month. He was in the workshop on a Tuesday morning, turning the legs for a commission from the apothecary on the far side of the market square, when he heard the creak of the road gate. He glanced up. She was taller than he remembered, or perhaps memory had compressed her in the way that memory sometimes reduces the full scale of things. She was wearing the gray and green of the Highstone clan now, a long coat with the emblem at the collar, which he recognized this time, because he had had occasion in the weeks since to look it up, the emblem of the High Lawkeeper, which was a scale and a bridge rendered together in a single clean line, because the clan's law said that justice was both a measure and a crossing point between what was and what ought to be. Her braids were bound in the formal style. She had a staff in her left hand that she did not need for walking, since she moved with the unhurried confidence of someone in complete possession of their faculties. The staff was carved with case marks, a traditional notation for the cases a lawkeeper had heard and ruled upon, and it was old and well-worn, which meant she had been working her bench for many years. She came to the workshop door and looked in at him. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. She looked at the workshop. She looked at the lathe and the tools and the long, orderly row of chisels and the stacked lumber and the grain of the workspace. A room that was exactly as clean and exactly as purposeful as it had been in the blizzard week, and not any different for time having passed. "I heard you found the documents," she said. "You told me where to look." "I told you they existed," she said. "You are the one who walked to the registrar's office." A pause. "The council has accepted the ruling on the charter clause. The case is decided. The grazing commons will be restored." He set down the turning tool. He leaned against the bench. "Is that what brings you?" "Partly," she said. "I owed you a conversation." He gestured toward the stool beside the fire, the one she had used in the blizzard week. She came inside. She did not duck the door exactly. She was tall enough that she might have needed to in another doorway, but she moved through it with the particular attentiveness of a person used to navigating a world not quite scaled to them, with a grace that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with long practice. She sat on the stool. He pulled the other one from the corner and sat across from her. "There was a trial," she said, Of the men who attacked my escort, 3 of the Stonemark brokers were convicted, 2 others have fled east and will be pursued. She looked at her hands for a moment, then at him. The charges of treason against me were formally voided. I have been restored to the bench. A pause. It was not comfortable for a time. No, he said, I imagine it wasn't. I was afraid on the road, she said. I want to say that plainly because I think I presented myself as less afraid than I was, and that was partly pride and partly habit. You were kind to me without needing anything from me in return, and I think I handled that poorly. He considered this. You handled it fine, he said. You were injured and in a stranger's house. I gave you a false name. You didn't know me, he said. You've been attacked on the road by men working for people with money and connections. A false name was a sensible precaution. She looked at him with the same assessing look she'd given the timber and the bandaging and the coffee cup, the look that was evaluating something she had not yet made up her mind about. You're a very practical man, she said. I work in wood, he said. Wood doesn't care about sentiment. You learn to see what is. Another of the good silences. Outside, the spring town went about its business in the uncomplicated way of a day that is neither too warm nor too cold, and the light through the workshop's east window was clear and honest and lit the workshop dust into small constellations. I'm here for the spring convening, she said. The council has invited me to speak on the ruling and the precedent cases. There will be a formal presentation of the documents. She paused. It will take a week, perhaps a little more. He waited. I was wondering, she said, whether you had room for a week. The inn is full already, and I have dealt with enough strangers recently that I find I prefer a known quantity. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the uncomplicated directness of someone who has stated a thing clearly and is now simply waiting to hear what is true. I have the small room, he said, and the fire and the barley. That's all I need, she said. He nodded. Then you have it. She was at the spring convening for 11 days. She spoke before the council on the first day and the third and the 7th, and each time Edric heard from the merchants and the tradespeople of Veldmere who had attended what she had said. The report was the same. She spoke plainly, without performance, about what the law said and what it meant and why it mattered, and the room listened the way a room listens when it recognizes that the person before it knows more about the subject than anyone else in the building, and is generous enough to share it without condescension. On the 4th day, she sent word that the council had agreed to show her the table, and would he like to come? He went. He had not been inside the meeting house since he delivered the piece, and walking in and seeing it set in the long room with the chairs arranged around it on both sides, human chairs and the wider, heavier oak benches that the clan representatives had brought from the eastern seat, was a different experience from having built it. The table looked right in the room the way that a piece of good work looks right in its proper use, not just a beautiful object but a living part of something larger. The natural edge in the meeting room light was the most important line in the space. Everything else arranged itself around it. She stood at the far end and ran one hand along the natural edge in the same way he had, not for smoothness, but for what was there. You see what I mean, he said, coming to stand beside her. About the wood telling you, she said. About the grain. He traced a section near the center where the figure tightened slightly, then opened again. Right here it crosses. The tree had a hard year drought or damage probably 100 years ago. The wood remembers it. I nearly planed it out, then decided to leave it. Why, she said. Because a difficult year that you survive is part of your history, he said. Planing it out would have been tidier, but it wouldn't have been honest. She looked at the crossing grain for a long moment. I'm going to remember that, she said quietly. They stayed for an hour. The council chairman came in and thanked them both with the formal warmth of a politician who is genuinely moved, but is also aware that he is in a public setting, and Edric accepted it with the same equanimity he gave to all such things, neither dismissing it nor making much of it. And then they walked back to the workshop together in the mild spring afternoon, talking about law and wood and the long business of building things that last. In the evenings she sat in the workshop. He worked and she read, or they talked in the easy way that had established itself between them in the blizzard week, the way of two people who have each found the other's pace and found it agreeable. She asked about the commissions, and he explained them. He asked about the cases she had ruled on in her years at the bench, and she described some of them, the land disputes and the trade agreements and the clan compact interpretations, with the same precision and attentiveness she brought to everything, but also with something warmer beneath it, the warmth of a person who genuinely loves their work and does not get enough chances to talk about it with someone who will actually listen. She talked about the clan, about the Highstone seat in the eastern ranges, where the compact had been drawn up 200 years ago, and where the law grove still stood, the grove of old ash trees planted by the founding clan keepers, one for each of the original charter clauses. She said it was the most beautiful place she knew, and she said it the way people say things they have not said aloud in a long time, carefully, as if the words are more fragile than they look. "How many trees?" he asked. 37, she said. "One for each clause. Some of them are very old, planted in the first decade of the compact, by the hands of the first keepers. You can tell the old ones by the size of them. The younger ones are perhaps 60 years. Some clauses were added as the compact grew." "And the ones that have come down," he said. He was genuinely asking. 8 over the years, she said. "Lightning, 2 bad storms in the last generation, one that simply aged out and fell." She turned her coffee cup. "The wood is in the dry barn at the seat. The clan keeps it because it is Law Grove wood. It belongs to the compact, not to any one person, but no one has known what to do with it. The elder who maintained the grove died 12 years ago, and no one learned his craft before he went." He thought about that. 8 trees, 60 to 200 years old, in a dry barn in the eastern ranges for a decade or more. He thought about old ash, properly dried, and what it does when a craftsman finally brings it out of the dark. "What were they thinking of making?" he said. "New benches for the law hall," she said. "The current ones are from the original compact signing and they're past the end of their life. The joints have gone. They've been repaired so many times they're more repair than bench. The elder had drawings somewhere. Plans for the new benches, cut from the grove wood, so the law hall would be made from the same trees as the charter itself. He never had the chance to begin them." Edric set down his coffee. He looked at the grain of the workbench under his hands, old pine, worn smooth from years of use, with the particular warmth of wood that has been handled, and is entirely comfortable in its role. "I would need to see the wood," he said, "before I could say anything useful about it." "I know," she said. "And the drawings, if they still exist. What he intended matters." "I know," she said again, and there was a patience in it that was not the patience of waiting for an answer she needed, but the patience of someone who has already received the answer she hoped for and is now simply allowing it to settle. He nodded once, and they sat for a while in the easy quiet of the workshop, with the fire and the coffee and the spring town going about its business outside, and it was good. He told her about the table. He had not mentioned it before, had not wanted to seem as if he was asking for credit, but she asked what he had been working on when the blizzard came, and he described it, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I should have liked to see it." "Maybe they'll let you," he said, "since you're partly responsible for the council having something worth meeting over." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, something that had been held at a distance, at a professional remove, came a step closer. Not all the way close, but a step. "I'd like that," she said. He wrote a note to the council chairman, who replied the following day that the high lawkeeper of the Highstone clan was welcome to view the council table at any time, and that the chairman was personally grateful to both parties for the contribution to the spring convening's successful outcome, and that if the carpenter had any future work of that quality he wished to offer the council by commission, the chairman's door was open. On the 9th evening of her stay, she asked him something he had not expected. "Will you come east someday," she said, "to the clan seat?" He was sharpening a chisel when she asked it, and he set the whetstone down and considered the question with the same attention he gave to things that mattered. "What would I do at a clan seat?" he said. "The Law Grove," she said. "Some of the trees are old enough that the wood is exceptional. Some have come down in the storms over the years. The clan keeps what falls, but no one knows how to work it properly. It's been sitting in the dry barn for 20 years. A pause. "I thought if a man who knows wood and doesn't ruin it were to come." "I see," he said. "It is not a small journey," she said. "I am not asking you to commit to it now. I'm asking whether it is a thing you could imagine." He picked up the whetstone and ran it along the chisel in a steady pass. The sound of iron on stone, clean and deliberate, filled the workshop for a moment. "I can imagine it," he said. She smiled. It was not a smile that performed itself or explained itself. It was simply a smile, warm and unhurried, the kind that comes when a thing a person has been hoping for without quite saying so has been confirmed. On the 11th day she left. She had an escort this time, the 4 riders who had come to his door in the early spring, the one in the gray coat and the 3 clan outriders. And they were waiting at the road gate in the early morning with the horses ready, and the eastern sky going pink and gold behind the ranges. She came to the workshop first. He was up and he had coffee on, and they had it together at the workbench in the early light, standing rather than sitting because standing is for leavings rather than arrivals, and there is a kind of honest acknowledgment in that. He had made bread the night before, because he knew she would be leaving early and a long road deserves a proper start. He wrapped the remaining half in cloth and set it beside her pack without ceremony, and she looked at it and then at him and said nothing, which was the right thing. "I'll write," she said, "when I'm back at the seat." "Good," he said. "And I'll look for the elder's drawings," she said. "If they still exist, he was a man who kept things." "Good," he said again. "The Law Grove ash," she said. "When the summer is over and the roads are easy." "When the summer is over," he agreed. She shouldered her pack. She put the staff in her hand. She stood in the doorway of the workshop in the early spring light, and she looked at him in the way she had looked at the timber and the joints and the finished table, with full attention, with the recognition of something worth knowing, and he looked back at her with the same plainness and the same directness, because he was a man who had never learned to be anything other than what he was, and had found, late in life, that this was not the disadvantage he had sometimes feared it might be. "Thank you," she said, "for the door." "There's always a door," he said. "For you." She walked out into the pink morning and down the road toward the riders, and Edric Holland stood in the doorway of his workshop and watched her go with the unhurried attention of a man who knows a thing has been begun and is content, for now, to let it begin. He went inside. He poured another cup of coffee. He went to the bench and looked at the next piece of work waiting for him, a length of cherry he had been saving for a commission he had not yet decided on, with a figure in the grain like a river seen from above, and he put his hand flat to the wood and read it, the way he always did, for direction, for the timber's own intentions, for what it wanted to become. Outside, the spring town was waking. The roads to the east were clear and dry. Somewhere in the eastern ranges, an old log grove stood in its silence, full of ash wood that had been waiting 20 years for someone who would not ruin it. Edric picked up his pencil and began to draw. He was not a man who needed much, and he had been content with little for a long time, and what he had now was not much more than what he'd had before: the workshop, the tools, the work, the fire at night. But it was different in the way that a room is different when it has been entered by the right person. Not louder, not larger, just different, more fully itself somehow. The way a piece of wood is more fully itself when a craftsman finally finds the cut that was waiting in it all along. He drew the first line on the cherry plank, and the line was clean, and the morning was good, and somewhere on the eastern road, riding toward the ranges, Vora of the Heistone clan was going home, restored to her bench, her case decided, her clan waiting, carrying with her, in the worn leather of her traveling pack, the memory of a small warm workshop and a man who had opened his door in a blizzard and asked no questions, and expected nothing in return. She had judged kings. She had ruled on the great questions of law and belonging that governed two people's lives across 100 years of shared and contested history. She had sat in the high seat of the law grove and heard arguments from chieftains and merchants, and clan elders and human magistrates, and she had given her rulings in the plain language of what was right and what the law said, without favor and without fear. And she had never, in all of that long history of deciding, encountered a human being who had simply done the right thing so naturally, so without ceremony, so without needing the world to notice, as the carpenter in Veldmere. The riders moved east. The road was clear. The mountains came up pink and clean ahead of them in the morning light. She thought about the table. She hoped, when she came back at the end of summer, that she would be able to sit at it for a while, at that long piece of old ash with its natural edge like a shoreline, the trestle built clean and true, every joint cut and wedged, and not a single nail in it. She thought about 2 stools on either side of a fire, and the ease of talking with someone who listened as if the words were worth hearing. She thought about the Law Grove ash wood in the dry barn, and the things it might become in the right hands. She thought about next winter, and the one after that, and she found she was not afraid of them in the way that she had been. The riders rode on. The morning opened up around them, wide and clear and full of the particular possibility that comes at the start of a season when the long cold is behind you and everything ahead is unwritten, and the road is yours.